The autumn wind howled across the Wyoming territory, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and the promise of an early winter. Samuel Hayes pulled his worn leather jacket tighter as he stepped onto the porch of his modest cabin, the wooden boards creaking under his boots. The sun had disappeared behind the jagged peaks of the Teton Range, painting the sky in shades of amber and deep purple. He'd been living alone in this remote valley for 3 years now, ever since he'd left his life as a sheriff in Cheyenne behind. The isolation suited him. No crowds, no obligations, just the honest work of tending to his small herd of cattle and the vegetable garden that barely sustained him through the harsh winters. The knock came just as he was banking the fire for the night. 3 soft raps, so quiet he almost missed them over the wind. Samuel frowned, setting down the poker. Visitors were rare out here, and anyone traveling this late in the season was either lost or running from something. He moved to the window, pulling back the faded curtain just enough to peer outside. A figure stood hunched on his porch, barely visible in the lamplight that filtered through the glass. Small, trembling. A woman, he realized. Her dress was torn and mud-stained, her hair hanging in tangled strands around her face. Samuel opened the door without hesitation. She looked up at him with eyes that held the kind of fear he'd seen too many times in his years wearing a badge. Her left cheek was swollen and discolored, a cut on her lip had scabbed over, and her right eye was rimmed with the dark purple of a healing bruise. "Ma'am," he said quietly, stepping aside. "Come in." She didn't move at first, just stood there swaying slightly on her feet. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't have anywhere else to go." "You don't need anywhere else to go," Samuel replied, his tone gentle but firm. "You're safe now." She stepped across the threshold, and he noticed how she flinched when he moved to close the door behind her. Every motion was careful, controlled, like someone who had learned to make herself invisible. The cabin was warm and simply furnished. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. A small kitchen table sat near the window, 2 chairs tucked beneath it. His bed was pushed against the far wall, covered with a heavy quilt his sister had made years ago. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair closest to the fire. "I'll make some tea." She remained standing, her arms wrapped around herself. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You're not trouble." Samuel moved to the kitchen area, filling a kettle from the water pump. "When's the last time you ate?" She didn't answer, but the way she looked at the floor told him everything he needed to know. As the kettle heated, Samuel pulled a blanket from the chest at the foot of his bed and placed it gently on the back of the chair. She was still standing exactly where he'd left her, as if afraid to move without permission. "What's your name?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Mitchell. I'm Samuel Hayes. This is my home, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need." For the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah looked directly at him. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're hurt. I know you're scared. And I know you didn't deserve whatever happened to you." He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "That's all I need to know." "Adee." The kettle began to whistle, and Samuel rose to prepare the tea. When he returned, Sarah had finally taken the seat, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She accepted the warm cup with trembling hands, and he noticed the faint marks around her wrists. Rope burns, old but not forgotten. They sat in comfortable silence as the wind continued to howl outside. The fire crackled softly, and slowly Sarah's shoulders began to relax. She took small sips of the tea, and Samuel pretended not to notice the way she kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting someone to come bursting through. "You can have the bed," he said finally. "I'll sleep on the floor." "I can't." "You can, and you will." His tone brooked no argument, but it wasn't harsh. "I've slept in worse places." Sarah nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you." "No need for thanks." Samuel stood, moving to gather some blankets for himself. "Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. If you're not, that's fine too." As he arranged his makeshift bed near the fireplace, Sarah's voice came softly from behind him. "Why are you helping me?" Samuel paused, considering his words carefully. "Because sometimes we all need someone to open the door." He turned down the lamp, leaving only the glow of the fire to illuminate the cabin. In the dim light, he could see Sarah settling into the bed, still wrapped in the blanket. For the first time in what he guessed had been months, she looked like she might actually sleep. Outside, the wind began to quiet, and the first stars appeared through the breaking clouds. In the morning, there would be questions to answer and decisions to make. But tonight, there was only the simple act of two people sharing warmth and shelter in a world that could be cruel beyond measure. Samuel closed his eyes, listening to the gentle rhythm of Sarah's breathing as it slowly evened out. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, she was safe, and sometimes that was enough. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying over the fire. For a moment she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back. The desperate flight through the darkness, the knock on a stranger's door, the kindness in Samuel's eyes. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. The bruises had stiffened overnight, and her ribs ached where Thomas's boot had found its mark 3 days ago. Through the window, she could see the sun climbing over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and green. Samuel stood at the stove, his back to her. He'd already dressed for the day in work clothes, sturdy pants, a flannel shirt, and boots that had seen years of honest labor. His movements were efficient and quiet, as if he was trying not to wake her. "Morning," he said without turning around. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted, then immediately regretted the honesty. It revealed too much about her situation. "Good." He turned, offering her a cup of coffee. "Breakfast is almost ready." Sarah accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The coffee was strong and bitter, nothing like the weak brew Thomas had always insisted on. She found herself actually enjoying it. "I should go," she said suddenly. "I've imposed on you enough." Samuel paused in his cooking, spatula halfway to turning the bacon. "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah stared down at her coffee, unable to answer. She had no money, no possessions, save for the torn dress she wore, and no family who would take her in. The nearest town was 30 miles away. And even there, she had no guarantee of finding work or shelter. "I don't know," she whispered. "Then stay." "I can't keep sleeping in your bed. We'll figure something out." Samuel transferred the bacon to a plate, adding eggs he'd scrambled in the same pan. "I've got some lumber behind the cabin. Been meaning to build a proper addition anyway." Sarah looked up at him, startled. "You do that?" "I do that." He set the plate in front of her, then sat down with his own breakfast. "But first, you need to eat, and rest, and heal." The food was simple, but good, better than anything she'd tasted in years. As she ate, Sarah found herself watching Samuel. He was probably in his mid-30s, with the weathered hands of someone who worked outdoors. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his eyes held a calmness that she envied. "You said you were a sheriff," she said, remembering their conversation the night before. "Was. Not anymore." He didn't offer any explanation, and Sarah didn't press. She understood the value of privacy. After breakfast, Samuel stood and reached for his hat. "I need to check on the cattle, fix a section of fence that came down in the storm last week. You rest. There are books on the shelf if you want something to read." "I could help," Sarah offered. "I'm used to hard work." Samuel studied her for a moment, taking in the bruises, the way she moved carefully to avoid jarring her injured ribs. "Maybe tomorrow. Today, you rest." He left her alone in the cabin, and Sarah found herself at a loss. It had been so long since she'd been allowed to simply exist without fear, without the constant anticipation of violence or criticism. She moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. Most were practical volumes, farming manuals, veterinary guides, a few books on law. But there were also novels, poetry, even a collection of Shakespeare. She pulled out a volume of poems by Emily Dickinson and settled into the chair by the window. The morning sun warmed her face as she read, and for the first time in years, she felt something approaching peace. Samuel returned at midday, carrying a bucket of fresh milk and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd accomplished his morning's work. He found Sarah still reading, curled up in the chair with the book in her lap. "Good book?" he asked. "Beautiful," Sarah replied. "I'd forgotten what it was like to read for pleasure. You read a lot before." "I was a teacher before I—" She trailed off, not ready to share that part of her story. Samuel nodded as if he understood. "There's a school in Willow Creek, about 20 miles south. They've been looking for someone to teach the children. Pay isn't much, but it comes with a small house." Sarah's heart leaped at the possibility, then crashed back down. "I don't have any references. My teaching certificate, I had to leave everything behind." "We'll figure it out," Samuel said, echoing his earlier words. "For now, how about some lunch?" The afternoon passed quietly. Samuel worked on repairs around the cabin, while Sarah continued reading. She found herself watching him through the window as he hammered new boards onto the chicken coop, mended a harness, and chopped wood for the evening fire. His movements were steady and purposeful, and she couldn't help but notice how different he was from Thomas, how he seemed to find satisfaction in productive work rather than seeking power over others. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Sarah finally found the courage to ask the question that had been troubling her all day. "Why don't you ask me what happened?" Samuel looked up from the bridle he was mending. "Because when you're ready to tell me, you will, and if you're never ready, that's fine too. Most people would be curious. Most people haven't seen what I've seen." He set down his work and met her eyes. "In my years as a sheriff, I met too many women who had to explain their bruises, justify their fear, convince others that they deserved help. I decided I didn't want to be the kind of man who made that necessary." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I was married to a man who believed that hitting me was his right, that I was his property to do with as he pleased." "Was?" Samuel asked gently. "I ran away 3 nights ago. After she touched her bruised cheek. "After he nearly killed me over a burned supper." Samuel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "And now? Now I'm here, and I don't know what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" The question was so simple yet so profound. Sarah realized that in all her years of marriage, no one had ever asked her what she wanted. "I want to teach again," she said slowly. "I want to wake up without fear. I want to be able to walk outside without looking over my shoulder." She paused. "I want to feel like a person again, not just something that exists for someone else's convenience." Samuel nodded. "Then that's what we'll work toward." As the fire died down and they prepared for sleep, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. It was fragile, like a newly sprouted seed, but it was there. And for the first time since she'd knocked on Samuel's door, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life worth living. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah's arrival, and the rhythm of life in the remote valley had settled into something approaching normalcy. Samuel had begun construction on a small addition to the cabin, a room that would give Sarah privacy and independence while keeping her close enough for protection. They worked together in comfortable silence, Sarah proving herself surprisingly skilled with hammer and nails. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow-green shadows, and she'd begun to smile more readily. Samuel had given her some of his sister's old clothes, stored in a trunk since her death the previous winter. The dresses were simple but clean, and wearing them made Sarah feel human again. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when their fragile peace was shattered. Samuel was in the barn, shoeing one of his horses, when he heard the thunder of hoofbeats approaching. He looked up to see 3 riders cresting the hill that overlooked his property. Even from a distance, he could tell they weren't friendly visitors. Their posture was too rigid, their pace too urgent. He set down his tools and walked toward the cabin, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. Old habits died hard, and his years as a sheriff had taught him to recognize trouble from a mile away. Sarah appeared in the doorway, attracted by the sound of approaching horses. When she saw the riders, her face went white as fresh snow. "Thomas," she whispered. The lead rider was a large man with a thick beard and cold eyes. He rode with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way, flanked by two younger men who had the look of hired hands. They pulled up about 20 yards from the cabin, their horses snorting and pawing the ground. "You Thomas Mitchell?" Samuel asked, stepping protectively in front of Sarah. "I am. And you've got something that belongs to me. I don't have anything that belongs to you." Thomas's laugh was harsh and without humor. "My wife seems to think otherwise. Sarah, get over here. We're going home." Sarah shrank back against the doorframe, her body trembling. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "The hell you're not." Thomas dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. "I've spent 2 weeks tracking you down, and I'm not leaving without you." Samuel moved forward, placing himself squarely between Thomas and the cabin. "The lady said she's not going. I suggest you respect her wishes." "Lady," Thomas spat. "She's my wife, my property, and I'll thank you to stay out of business that doesn't concern you. When you rode onto my land and started making threats, you made it my business." Thomas studied Samuel with calculating eyes. "You're that sheriff from Cheyenne. Hayes, isn't it? Heard you had some trouble with the law yourself." Samuel's face remained impassive, but Sarah saw his hand move closer to his gun. "That's right. And I know the law well enough to know that a woman has the right to leave an abusive husband." "Abusive?" Thomas's voice rose. "I never laid a hand on her that she didn't deserve. A man's got a right to discipline his wife when she gets out of line. Not on my property, he doesn't." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could see the muscles in Samuel's shoulders bunch beneath his shirt, and she knew he was prepared to fight. But she also knew that Thomas wouldn't hesitate to kill him, and the thought of Samuel dying because of her was unbearable. "Samuel," she said quietly, "it's all right. I'll go with him." "No." Samuel's voice was firm. "You won't." Thomas smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Listen to your woman, Hayes. She knows where she belongs. She belongs wherever she chooses to be, and she's chosen to be here." Thomas gestured to his companions, and they began to dismount. "I tried to do this the easy way, but if you want to make it hard, that's fine by me." Thomas, please." Sarah stepped forward, her voice desperate. "Just leave us alone. I'll give you grounds for divorce. You can tell everyone I abandoned you. Just please, don't hurt him." "Hurt him?" Thomas laughed. "Sarah, darling, I'm going to kill him. And then I'm going to take you home and teach you what happens to wives who run away." Samuel's gun was in his hand faster than Sarah would have thought possible. The two hired hands went for their weapons, but Samuel's voice stopped them cold. "I wouldn't." Thomas raised his hands slightly, but his smile never wavered. "You can't watch her forever, Hayes. I'll wait. I'll come back. And when I do, she'll pay for every day she's been gone. Then you'll have to go through me first." "Maybe I will." Thomas remounted his horse, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. "But I'll be back. And next time, I won't come alone." As the three riders disappeared over the hill, Sarah collapsed against the doorframe, her legs no longer able to support her. Samuel holstered his gun and moved to her side, but she flinched away from his touch. "He's right," she whispered. "You can't watch me forever. He'll come back and he'll kill you, and it'll be my fault." "Sarah, look at me." Samuel's voice was gentle but insistent. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and he saw the fear that had returned to them, the same fear that had been there the night she'd knocked on his door. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. You don't understand. Thomas always gets what he wants. He has money, influence. He'll bring the law down on you, claim you kidnapped me, or let him try." Samuel's voice was steady, confident. I know every judge within 100 miles. I know which ones are honest and which ones can be bought. Thomas Mitchell might have influence, but he's not the only one. Sarah searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. She found none. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where Thomas and his men had disappeared. "Because I once stood by and watched a good woman destroyed by a man who thought he owned her. I swore I'd never let it happen again. Your wife, my sister. She married a man like Thomas. I was young, believed it wasn't my place to interfere between a husband and wife. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just promise me you won't give up. Promise me you'll fight for the life you want." Sarah looked around the valley, at the cabin that had become her refuge, at the man who had offered her protection without asking for anything in return. She thought of the schoolhouse in Willow Creek, of the possibility of teaching again, of waking up without fear. "I promise," she whispered. Samuel nodded, then turned his attention to practical matters. "We need to be prepared. Thomas will be back, and next time he might not be so civilized about it." As they spent the rest of the day checking locks, cleaning weapons and planning defensive positions, Sarah felt her fear begin to transform into something else. Determination. She had run once, and she had found sanctuary, but she wouldn't run again. This time she would stand and fight for the life she was building. The sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Somewhere out there, Thomas Mitchell was planning his return. But here, in this remote cabin, two people who had found each other in the darkness were preparing to face whatever came next, together. The attack came 3 days later, just before dawn. Sarah woke to the sound of Samuel's voice, low and urgent. "Get dressed. Quickly." She was instantly alert, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the window, she could see shapes moving in the pre-dawn darkness, too many shapes to be cattle or wildlife. "How many?" she whispered, pulling on her dress and boots. 6, maybe 7, they're surrounding the cabin." Samuel checked his rifle, then handed her a smaller gun. "Remember what I taught you?" Sarah nodded, her hands surprisingly steady as she took the weapon. They'd spent the past few days practicing, and while she was no expert, she could hit what she aimed at. "The addition," Samuel said, referring to the half-built room. "There's good cover there, and you can get to the horses if you need to." "I'm not leaving you." "Sarah, I'm not leaving you," she repeated firmly. "We face this together." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Together." The first shots came as the sun crested the mountains, shattering the morning silence. Wood splintered from the cabin's walls as bullets tore through the logs. Samuel and Sarah took cover behind the stone fireplace, returning fire through the windows. "Give it up, Hayes." Thomas's voice carried across the valley. "Send her out, and we'll let you live." Samuel's answer was a rifle shot that sent one of the attackers diving for cover behind a boulder. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah found herself moving with a calmness she didn't know she possessed, reloading weapons and passing ammunition to Samuel. Every shot fired at them was a shot fired at the life they'd been building together. Then she saw him, Thomas, circling around to approach the cabin from the blind side. He was moving carefully, taking advantage of the chaos to get close enough for a clean shot at Samuel. Sarah didn't think, she simply acted. She slipped out the back door, while Samuel continued firing from the front, circling around to intercept Thomas. Her heart pounded as she moved through the tall grass, every step taking her closer to the man who had terrorized her for years. She found him crouched behind the woodpile, his rifle trained on the cabin window where Samuel's shadow was visible. His finger was tightening on the trigger when Sarah pressed her gun against the back of his head. "Don't." Thomas froze, then slowly turned his head to look at her. "Sarah, I should have known you'd grown a backbone." "Call them off," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Tell your men to leave." Thomas laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You won't shoot me. You don't have it in you. I ran away from you, Sarah replied. I shot at your men. I think you'd be surprised what I have in me now. For the first time since she'd known him, Thomas looked uncertain. You're still my wife. No, Sarah said firmly, I'm not. I stopped being your wife the night you beat me half to death over a burned supper. I stopped being your wife when I walked out that door and chose to live. Thomas's eyes hardened. You think that sheriff of yours will protect you forever? I'll kill him, Sarah, and then I'll make you pay for every day you've been gone. You won't kill anyone. Sarah's voice was calm, resolved. Because you're going to call off your men and leave, and you're never going to come back. Or what? You'll shoot me? Thomas started to turn, confident that she wouldn't pull the trigger. The shot echoed across the valley. Thomas looked down at his shoulder, where blood was beginning to seep through his shirt. Sarah had aimed carefully, not to kill, but to wound, to show him that she meant business. The next one goes in your chest, she said quietly. Call them off. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, then cupped his hands around his mouth. Stand down, we're leaving. The shooting stopped abruptly. Sarah could hear Samuel calling her name, but she didn't move, didn't take her eyes off Thomas. This isn't over, Thomas said, clutching his wounded shoulder. Yes, it is. Sarah's voice was firm. Because if you ever come near me again, if you ever threaten Samuel or try to hurt anyone else I care about, I will kill you, and I'm a much better shot than I was 5 minutes ago. Thomas struggled to his feet, his face pale from pain and shock. You've changed. Yes, Sarah agreed, I have. She watched as Thomas stumbled toward his horse, helped by one of his men. The group rode away without looking back, leaving only the acrid smell of gunpowder and the sound of Samuel's approaching footsteps. Sarah! Samuel rounded the corner of the cabin, his face tight with worry. When he saw her standing there, still holding the gun, relief flooded his features. Are you hurt? No, she said, finally lowering the weapon. I'm fine. Samuel looked at the blood on the woodpile, then at her. What happened? I made a choice. Sarah met his eyes, and he saw something different there. Not the fear that had haunted her for weeks, but strength. I chose to fight for what I want. Samuel nodded slowly. And what do you want? Sarah looked around the valley, at the cabin that had become her sanctuary, at the man who had given her the chance to find herself again. I want to teach again. I want to wake up without fear. I want to build something good with someone who sees me as an equal, not as property. And you think you can do that here? I think I can do that anywhere as long as I remember who I am. She paused. But I'd like to do it here, with you, if you'll have me. Samuel's answer was to gather her into his arms, holding her close as the sun climbed higher over the mountains. Around them, the valley was quiet, except for the wind in the grass and the distant lowing of cattle. There's something I need to tell you, Sarah said, her voice muffled against his chest. What's that? I wrote to the school in Willow Creek. They wrote back. They want to meet with me about the teaching position. Samuel pulled back to look at her, a smile spreading across his face. That's wonderful. It means I'd have to ride there twice a week. It's a long journey. I'll build you a cart. We'll make it work. Sarah laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the valley. We'll make it work. As they walked back toward the cabin, Sarah felt the last of her fear fall away. She had faced the worst of her past and emerged victorious. More importantly, she had discovered that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. The sun was fully up now, painting the world in shades of gold and green. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. But for the first time in years, Sarah looked toward the future with hope instead of fear. She had found her sanctuary. She had found her strength. And she had found a man who understood that love meant supporting someone's growth, not controlling their choices. Behind them, the cabin stood solid and welcoming, its walls bearing the scars of the morning's battle, but still strong. Like Sarah herself, it had weathered the storm and emerged intact. The old Sarah, the one who had knocked on the door with bruises on her face, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who had learned to fight for what she wanted, and who understood that true strength came not from never falling, but from choosing to get back up. As they reached the cabin, Samuel stopped and turned to her. "Are you ready for whatever comes next?" Sarah smiled, her face bright with determination and hope. "With you beside me, I'm ready for anything." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of pine and possibility. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to the small human drama that had played out in their shadow. But in this remote valley, two people had found something precious. Not just love, but the courage to build a life worth living. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.